Hey there, Internet friends. Welcome to That D Plus Show. Class is in session for the only show from that nerdy site that lets you know what kind of quality to expect right from the name. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey, and each week I sit down with guests to talk about a Disney Plus offering of their choosing. This show is made possible entirely by the support of our patrons over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. So if you like the show and you can support us over there, we would definitely appreciate it. But if you can't, no big deal. The fact that you're listening is awesome, and of course we would love it if you like, subscribe, rate, review, and share the podcast with your friends. Joining me today, I have Cameron Abbott back with us. How you doing, Cameron?
Hey, what's going on, nerds?
What is going on? This week we are going to be talking about Disney Gallery The Mandalorian, the Mandalorian behind-the-scenes series that is currently releasing out there on Disney+. There are 3 episodes out there so far, and when I was like... This is one, admittedly, that I had kind of in the chamber to do as like a solo episode, because I find a lot of these like little docuseries are good fodder for that kind of stuff, because like, hey, I can talk about this in response myself without necessarily needing another person to bounce off of. But you kind of were like, hey, let's do an episode on that one. I was like, absolutely, let's get you on, Cameron, to do this. So I want to throw to you in particular, why did you want to talk about this one today?
You know, I really wanted to talk about this with somebody else because there was so much about what they were talking about. For those of you who don't know, who haven't seen it, please watch it before watching this. But it gives such an interesting look into the people who were behind something that I loved and still love. Like, I haven't stopped loving it. Season 2 is coming out soon. But Season 1 is such a great look at what is it like when a curator, a creative curator, decides to let people contribute to a project. And it's the way that they break this down, especially after just watching that first episode, you realize The Mandalorian is not a normal project, not even by Star Wars standards. It's a very unusual project, where you have a creative head who brings in other creative people, and he oversees what they do on a day-to-day basis, almost like a producer, but there's just so much more about what he's doing and what they're doing. There's something very special about it, and you understand that when you actually start to... I understood it when I watched The Mandalorian. I'm like, this is something very special. And I was curious about that. And what ended up happening is, after watching this, I'm like, that's why it's special, because these people knew it was special. These people knew there was something special about this. And it shows in their approach and each person and what episode they covered and what they did and their unique take on it, whether it's Dave Feloni, whether it's Bryce Daley Howard. There's all sorts of different people from different backgrounds, from different experiences, who all love Star Wars, and all of them love Star Wars for such different reasons. And it's so cool to see this creative collaboration on this level with this much of a budget. Like, if this happened on a smaller indie project, oh, this is something super cool. I totally get that. I love that. But instead, it's a focus on a massive, enormous budgeted project being helmed by the guy who literally brought us the MCU initially with Iron Man. And kind of this creative drive that Jon Favreau has. I love Jon Favreau. I adore Jon Favreau. I will always stand this film, but John Carter...
John Carter from Mars?
John Carter from Mars, yeah.
That's one we need to do. I saw that when I was thumbing through things to watch on Disney Plus not too long ago. That's one I enjoy that movie very much. I think it had a very troubled production history, and that helped fuel why it bombed. But yeah, I had a fun time with that. So it's that'll definitely be a fun future episode that you and I should sit down and do for this show.
But like,
was Jon Favreau involved on that?
Cupcake. Yeah. The cupcake. Okay.
You can have a cupcake.
Thank you, Ginny. Ginny, can you close my door? Nope, she won't. Okay, give me a second. I gotta close my own door.
Cameron getting a cupcake from one of his nieces. That's adorable.
No, she didn't give it to me. She just came to tell me that there were cupcakes.
Oh, okay.
She wanted to show me her cupcake that she got.
Nice.
Normally I have things like that muted.
All good. I think we'll keep it in this episode just for the joy of it.
She literally came bursting in faster than I could, like, mute myself. So that happened.
But so Jon Favreau was involved in John Carter from Mars? I didn't remember that.
I'm pretty sure. Let me double check it here.
Like, I remember his big thing was Cowboys and Aliens was his, like, after Iron Man, like, success. That was the one he attempted that kind of crashed and burned itself, but I suppose possibly.
Let me see this here. Not the plot.
This is admittedly, like, this jumping ahead a little bit to the roll call section of this. This is going to be a little light in the roll call because I'm saving a lot of the cast and crew descriptions for when we do a dedicated D+ episode on the actual show, The Mandalorian Season 1, so which we just haven't pulled together. So a lot of the people involved in this project, obviously given their involvement on the other one, are I'm going to highlight them when we talk about the show itself, not this kind of behind-the-scenes version of the show.
Okay, so this is what it was. Paramount, when Paramount took control of the property to make a film from it, let's see, Robert Rodriguez signed on in 2004. And then 2005, Robert Rodriguez had planned to use an all-digital stage, like all this stuff that he was planning to do for it. Then he stirred up some film industry controversy owing to his decisions to credit Miller as co-director on the film adaptation. As a result, he had to resign from the Directors Guild. They couldn't afford to pay somebody who wasn't guild supported. And then let's see here.
And all that sounds like Sin City stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, this is what ends up happening. Jon Favreau came on in October 2005 to do it. They wanted to bring things back to the original novel. They made sure that the Barsoomian Tharks are 15 feet tall. They wanted to make sure that they kept all of that sort of stuff because the other people had wanted to make it more of a modern, like he was a modern soldier, etc., rather than a Civil War soldier. And they're like, well, he wouldn't know how to ride a horse if he was a modern soldier. He wouldn't know how to do cavalry battle if that's the case. And so they brought it back to its original point, which is was fundamental to the film. But anyway, they were going to keep working on it, and then he wanted to use practical effects. Basically, everything that we got out of the Disney adaptation was started by Jon Favreau with the Paramount adaptation. And so, in August 2006, Paramount chose not to renew the film rights, preferring to focus on the Star Trek franchise, and Favreau and Fergus, his partner, moved on to Marvel Studios' Iron Man. So he made Iron Man instead of John Carter. So the reason I got it confused is because in one of the promo things, they got Jon Favreau to talk about John Carter. And I remember him talking about how much he loves those how much he loves those novels. And so from there, I love John Carter. It's like I love The Princess of Mars. I read the books when I was a kid. In my early teens, I read them, and they were this because
I imagine we can save a lot of this for our dedicated episode to John Carter, as opposed to continuing to go down this rabbit hole.
Thank you. We're not talking about John Carter, Cameron. Why are you talking about John Carter?
Bring it back to Jon Favreau.
Stop talking about John Carter, Cameron, you moron. So Jon Favreau has always been somebody who, he has a creative vision that I think when people look at him, or they hear him talk, or they hear him, in any of the films that he has himself been in, people don't know the artist, Jon Favreau. They know Jon Favreau, the actor from Swingers. They know Jon Favreau, as the, boyfriend in one or other, he's had such small film roles, or they see him as the guy from Chef. And,
I think they see him as the guy behind Iron Man more than anything else at this point. Because I guarantee most people who know Jon Favreau don't know that Jon Favreau did Chef as his little indie project after Iron Man 2.
But I mean, but if you didn't know Jon Favreau was the director of Iron Man, he was just in it, as the actor.
Yeah. Yeah.
People really only know that on the surface level. They don't know about Jon Favreau as this incredible cinematic artist.
Or they know him, as because what he did Jungle Book, and now he did Lion King, the live action, in quotes, versions of those.
Yeah. But what he came to Star Wars with, and the absolute reverence that he treats the property with. He brought on people who also thought that it feels very much like they're all very careful because they feel like they're talking about sacred ground when they talk about Star Wars. There's something very special about these directors that he chose. And the fact that he chose Dave Feloni to not just be work on consultation, but to actually direct an episode.
Yeah.
Speaks volumes. And oh my gosh, in the first episode, they basically break through and talk about I love it when everybody talks about Dave Filoni.
Yeah, we'll dive into that a little bit but I want to run through kind of the other little quick segments. So the episodes in particular we're going to be discussing today, if you're catching this, well after the fact, are the episodes dedicated to directing, legacy, and cast. I'm very intrigued by the future episodes that come out on technology, practical, visualization, score, and connections.
Oh, score is going to be amazing.
Score is going to be great. I'm curious if connections is going to be how this connects to the broader Star Wars universe, because obviously there are a ton of those connections within this series that at the surface level we didn't know that we were getting necessarily. So it's really cool that it has kind of been tied into everything else. But a little bit of history lesson on this show. It was originally released on May the 4th, 2020. May the 4th be with you, Day. Other Disney Plus-ish releases at the time were the focus of last week's episode, Prop Culture, which kind of released all of its episodes. But this series has been and is currently releasing 1 week at a time. So it is coming out there. The runtime of the series is approximately 30 minutes per episode. It is currently going. The Who's Who, again, going to be an abbreviated Who's Who, which we'll dive into deeper when it comes to an episode dedicated to The Mandalorian itself. But you have Brad Burra, who is the director of the documentary series here, and he was a producer on some Marvel items early on, like some of the one-shots, including Item 47 and Agent Carter, the one-shot of Agent Carter, not the series of Agent Carter. And then he also has done a couple of the Marvel Cinematic Universe documentaries, shorts, assembling a universe and expanding the universe, I think both of those are like Marvel Studios assembling a universe and Marvel Studios expanding the universe, that dive into kind of the making of the cinematic universe there. And then the kind of starring for these few episodes, at least, you have here in the director's episode, you have Jon Favreau, Dave Filoni, Deborah Chow, Rick Famuyiwa, I always butcher his name, and Bryce Dallas Howard, as well as Taika Waititi. Then in the Legacy episode, you have a few of the animators whose names I didn't remember to capture. But you have, again, Favreau and Kathleen Kennedy, and Dave Filoni's in that one. And then in the cast episode here, kind of the third one out so far, you have basically Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni, and then Pedro Pascal, Carl Weathers, and Gina Carano, all kind of joining in the table conversation. A little bit of trivia on this is more like Mandalorian trivia itself than this particular series, but it's Mandalorian trivia that I think relates to the who's who of this series, so figured I wanted to pull these few items. Having Dave Filoni, Rick Famuyiwa, and Deborah Chow make cameos as X-Wing pilots in Chapter 6 was originally a joke suggestion by Filoni to Jon Favreau, but it obviously happened in the series proper. Those three directors made a cameo, and then obviously Taika Waititi is a cameo as IG-11. So Bryce Dallas Howard is really the only of the directors in Season 1 that did not get a dedicated cameo. A December 2019 Vulture article drew attention to the question of how often the masked actor on screen in full-body costume as the Mandalorian is Pedro Pascal instead of one of the credited Mandalorian doubles, Brendan Wayne and Lateef Crowder, with Pascal's voice performance being dubbed in. Since the actors collaborated, and a lot of this is kind of covered in the episode 3 cast things, that's why I'm bringing it in here. Since the actors collaborate to keep movement consistent, the audience is unlikely to be able to tell without behind-the-scenes info. Notably, though, Pascal does not appear on-screen as the Mandalorian at all in episode 1, Sanctuary of the Mandalorian. So that was an interesting little tidbit, and I appreciated that. So you have basically Pedro Pascal is kind of the credited actor. Then you have Brendan Wayne, who is the grandson of legendary actor John Wayne. John Wayne, best known for doing the Westerns, and The Mandalorian, heavily influenced by Westerns. Brendan Wayne, as is highlighted in the 3rd episode of this series, was basically the double dedicated to the gunplay that The Mandalorian has, while Lateef Crowder, the other double, is very much more the physical fighting combat, jujitsu type stuff. So that's kind of how the 3 roles were divided up to all feed into that one character. So cool. That's the dedicated trivia, kind of as it was the most relevant to what we've experienced and what we've seen so far in this particular series. So yeah, what do we think of this series? I think you've kind of already touched on a lot of kind of why you picked it, as well as why you really enjoy this kind of behind the scenes look, Cameron. But I don't know if you have anything to add in that before we dive into some of our favorite little sequences.
Yes, I think that it's so important to, especially after the controversy between The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker. There's constant questions of the method of which a Star Wars project is being made now. That's come under a lot of scrutiny.
Mm-hmm.
How many people knew about this, etc., etc. It's weird because when you're making a film, the film really doesn't even come together until they're in the editing bay post-production. You don't really know what the film is going to look like until then. That's what every director, right, any person will tell you who makes films. But,
I mean, I think
yeah.
Historically, you have a stronger structure going into a film, but yes, in the editing bay is where you kind of decide. I think I would describe it more as a film can wildly change when it's in the editing bay, based on the performances you take and what you edit into the film. But it should, hopefully, in most cases, if storytelling if general storytelling guidelines are being allowed and permitted, there should be some kind of pretty solid framework going into the edit of, well, we recorded all this stuff because we knew we were trying to tell this story. The story might change a little bit here and there in the edit bay, but and you'll cut some things out here and there, but it should mostly be there. But it can change wildly in the edit bay.
And I should say,
I think the broader controversy around the films certainly was that they didn't have kind of an overarching plan going into episode 7 to say here's what we're mapping out for 7, 8, and 9.
Yeah.
And it was 7 got made, and then 8 got made in a completely different direction, and then 9 got made in a completely different direction. And so you didn't. They didn't know when they were making 7 how 9 was going to wrap up. Versus, I think, kind of what you're getting at here is that the collaborative nature that this series really highlights about The Mandalorian is showing how everybody kind of was involved in the decision making to tell this narrative of this particular story over these 8 episodes, right?
I mean, I guess that is where I was going with it. More so when I said you don't really know what kind of film you're going to get until you're out of the edit bay, that really has more to do with the concept of tone and the concept, the deeper methods of what I was actually mentioning, because I think that overarching, you're right there. Thank you for putting that kind of asterisk to what I was saying, because that definitely would clear it up for other people. I'm I don't know why you're doing so much correction, Trevor, and then it's oh wait, what I said could definitely have been taken in a wildly different way. Really what I was referring to is when you're talking about things like tone, when you're talking about things like touch, a director's touch on a film and how they direct it and what comes out of it is usually done so much far as, I don't know, I've been watching a lot of stuff on the making of films lately, and there's so much of they're okay, well, we need to get this shot, and this shot, and it's really dawned on me that the film really isn't made so much on set, so much it's made in the edit bay with all the shots that you've taken. You've made the movie out there, but it's not really a movie until you get it into the edit bay. And to have these people who, almost like a council unto themselves, said, we are the Mandalorian Council, so to speak. Like, this is what, like, each of them have such a different dynamic with each other, and they've all learned from each other, and they've all helped each other out in different ways. And to see their growth as creators, as actors, just, like, it's very, like, I love when they bring up Gina Carano's character in episode 3, where they bring up, like, what she does so well. And it's like, there was a lot of criticism coming out from her episodes that she was in where, like, she wasn't considered as, quote-unquote, like, a high-caliber actress. And you realize that that's not why they didn't pick her up because she was, like, this brilliant, Broadway or, Shakespearean actress. They picked her up because she
can embody the character.
Yeah, she can embody the character so much as the character was created around her. Mm-hmm. And there is a sense of they wanted somebody who... And here's the thing, Gina Carano's character feels lived in. Like, feels like a real person. Because of just the way she carries herself, the way that she does things. What she does while she's acting is far more important than what she says or how she delivers her lines. And it's made very clear of that in episode 3. But, man, just the ability to kind of, like, dive deep into the creative process of The Mandalorian as a project, the just totally different way that The Mandalorian as a project was built, this kind of creative council of brilliant minds, of directors and creators from all different types of backgrounds, whether you have like a Hollywood princess in Bryce Dallas Howard to Dave Feloni, who came from animation, who had never directed any live action before in his life. And that what you get from that diversity is so good and just so brilliant, and that's how you end up with a show like The Mandalorian. So,
yeah, I'm enjoying a lot of it because I love kind of behind the scenes storytelling that we get. But to a little bit of kind of maybe even touching on your point there, I think there is also like I'm watching a lot of this stuff, especially in the second episode, because I have a lot of thoughts on Dave Filoni's like closer on that episode, talking about the Phantom Menace, that we will dive into here. But so I have like the caveat that I have, or what I'm watching when I'm watching this series, is it is recognizing that it is still a Disney produced thing, so they're trying to put all of this in the best possible light. And I'm not saying that like they're doing it, maliciously or something like that, but the way they talk about some of the stuff is like, okay, yeah, this is dedicated to be a love fest for the show as opposed to an unbiased behind the scenes thing, I guess. As a parallel, I'm not watching it, but The Last Dance is the big thing in the sports world right now. And Ken Burns kind of came out and was like, hey, yeah, like, great, but the fact that you have Michael Jordan involved at all taints what could be a more purely objective viewpoint of that saga. And the idea that, like, that because you're including Michael Jordan, the subject of the documentary, within the documentary itself, and maybe giving him final say on what can and can't be discussed, you're not telling the full story. You're telling the story that he's approving, or the story that you're crafting around the potential fear of him including it. So the fact that this is a Disney-produced thing about Disney, it is like, hey, let's give ourselves a pat on the back. And not that it's an unearned pat on the back, but it is like, we're not going to hear the bad stories of what it was like working on this, or the troubles and the tribulations that they faced. It is going to be all with kind of the perspective of, hey, we're putting this out here. One of the things I did want to touch on that you kind of when you were touching and highlighting, like the fact that everything is going into this big budget project, was that this was the tentpole project launching Disney Plus. This was like the reason outside of, hey, you'll get the access to the library of Disney things. This was the new thing that you will get only on Disney Plus, was The Mandalorian. So there absolutely were like resources put behind this, and so these are even more resources being put behind, like, hey, let's come celebrate this thing we did while we wait for season 2. So I just it's not going to color my viewpoint of the series as a whole all that much, but it is in there, in particular with the second episode where they kind of touch on legacy stuff, and really, actually, I guess a lot of like Dave Filoni's involvement in this is fascinating to me, that we can dive into a little bit more later. But so before we dive into that, I'll throw it to you, Cam. Any favorite moments that you really want to highlight and touch on?
So before we get to favorite moments, I actually want to I want to respond to your comment about Ken Burns in The Last Dance, because here's a big thing about it, is that Ken Burns is probably the most prolific documentarian of the modern age, and possibly of all time. Mm-hmm. The breadth of work that he's done, whether it's Ken Burns baseball, or Vietnam, the Civil War, anything that he's ever done, is such an incredible look at history that is purely objective and, quote-unquote objective. You can't...
Yeah.
By what he chooses to...
Nothing with artistic bone is purely objective. He has as much a narrative, or a narrative that he's pushing, albeit whatever it is, like his narrative is, I want to really dive into like the historical accuracies of this, but it is, he's picking and choosing what parts of history to showcase as well.
Exactly. He's still curating, and curating will always come with a bias. And I think that when it comes to something like The Last Dance, which I've also been watching lately, which is just an incredible look at, like, it's true, like, Michael Jordan was the biggest athlete in the world. And the Chicago Bulls were, I mean, even if they weren't even if you weren't from Chicago, the Chicago Bulls were kind of everybody's favorite team.
I mean, not here. They were the enemy, because the 1 or 2 years I was really into basketball was when the Suns had a great season, made it to the finals, and then lost against the Bulls. I was like, no, boo Bulls.
But if you watch that episode of The Last Dance, they talk about how like that was the most difficult playoff finals run they've ever had. And it's true, for that period of time. But I mean, even then, I was Charles Barkley was my favorite basketball player for so many years. But even I admitted Michael Jordan was the biggest, and best one. Mm-hmm. You just couldn't argue against it. The man was so incredibly talented, and just it's so interesting to see The Last Dance. Like you said though, what Ken Burns was complaining about was to have your subject be. Even if, like you mentioned, even have the ability to say no, curtails and tailors how you design your documentary around the possibility of him saying yes to everything. With something like this, and I think it's important, like you definitely noted, we're not going to see the bad side of it. But I also don't think that this is a documentary. And when it's what kind of behind-the-scenes thing, authentic behind-the-scenes look at something is not 100% in the positive camp for what was going for the project.
I mean, yeah, I guess that I look at it as documentary because we don't get stuff I guess, yeah, theoretically, if The Mandalorian had been hey, here's the season 1 Blu-ray, this would be a set of special features, vignettes and videos that you would have on the Blu-ray, that we're instead getting here as a standalone Disney Plus series, would be my guess. And so I look at, I guess, any behind the scenes content as documentary in the broader sense of documentary. It's not It's not a dedicated hey, we're going to have Ken Burns voiceover or something and talking about or whatever. But
I think that's important though, because when you're having somebody like Ken Burns being the authority on what is and what is not a good documentary is wrong. Because at the end of the day, what the level of he is a documentarian of a certain caliber and standard when it comes to history. But when it also comes to something like this, like you said, it does fall under the kind of status of a documentary. Behind the scenes works always do. But I also think that it's important to note that what we're seeing with this is such a unique perspective from the idea. Like, the only reason this is interesting to me, like really this interesting to me, is because of the way they built the project. With Jon Favreau at the helm, but then having these also incredible directors being a part of it, and like this weird hybrid of television and film being brought together here. Because some stuff they're like, I can't believe we're doing this, and it's like, well, that's pretty basic television stuff, but television stuff normally doesn't get to see this level of budget and resources.
Yeah, and Star Wars doesn't usually get to see television stuff.
Exactly. And I think that's what it comes down to. So I think that this is such a unique way of learning about this project.
Yeah.
But for sure, like, you know, and let's go ahead and jump into the big topic right now, like, because we're talking about our favorite moments. One of my favorite moments is for sure Dave Feloni casting a rose-tinted lens over the Phantom Menace.
Yeah, and so real quick, just to respond to your response,
Sure.
the comparison I bring up in Ken Burns, I guess, is more like, yeah, I think any documentarian could have an equal say on that or something like that. But it's more to paint this as, I look at this more as like an advertising arm of Disney as opposed to a third-party independent documentarian coming into this. Is really that's the comparison I was trying to really draw in.
Oh, and I acknowledge that.
And bringing up
100%.
Ken Burns as kind of, and his thoughts on it.
I know. I just thought it was such an interesting analysis that, or like comparison you made, that I wanted to talk more about it.
Yeah. But yeah, so the thing that has probably made the most headlines, or most kind of certainly the most virality of this series, was the end of the second episode here, dedicated to Legacy, where Dave Filoni paints this very rosy, very poetic retelling of the impact of the Duel of the Fates sequence, where he basically paints it as Qui-Gon Jinn and Darth Maul are really like dueling for the fate of Anakin's future, where if Qui-Gon Jinn wins, he'll be the father figure that Anakin has never had. But he doesn't win, and obviously neither does Darth Maul, so Obi-Wan ends up becoming kind of the brotherly figure, but Anakin is still lacking and missing that father figure kind of thing. And it's a very like beautifully told and explained portrayal that I take significant issue because I don't think the film backs it up at all. I think it completely disregards how Qui-Gon Jinn is set up in that film, because Qui-Gon Jinn is not... Dave Filoni is talking about how like Qui-Gon Jinn recognizes that, you know, the Jedi Order needs to, you know, embrace love and embrace these things that the Jedi Order doesn't, and the Jedi are becoming robotic, and so he recognizes that Anakin needs a father figure. And I'm like, that's not what I got out of Qui-Gon at all in Phantom Menace. Qui-Gon Jinn fully embraces the idea that this kid is the one who will fulfill this prophecy. That is Qui-Gon's motivation. It is not to become a father figure to Anakin. And so it's like, it feels almost like... And the fact that this whole thing about the Phantom Menace happens in a thing dedicated to the Mandalorian, it's like, if you... like one step remove it, it's like that should be on the cutting room floor of a documentary surrounding the Mandalorian, but it is like the team behind the Mandalorian was so engrossed by the story Dave Filoni told of how he and George Lucas have kind of like how they think about the Duel of the Fates. It's like, oh yeah, if that was what we saw, then I would have significantly fewer issues with Phantom Menace, but that's not what is in Phantom Menace. that's you trying to retcon Phantom Menace with a nice little like rosy story. So and I like that you said that. So there's been a long contention between people who've only seen the film and like they think this of Qui-Gon's character versus what you get in both the novelization of the Phantom Menace and also in Qui-Gon's developed backstory in the expanded universe, which is almost all of it has been brought forth as full-fledged canon based off of new stuff that's come out since Disney's acquisition. And it's interesting to note because... But none of that, like, Phantom Menace was pre-acquisition, and there was expanded canon pre-acquisition too that did not, like, again, so Phantom Menace did not actually portray what Dave Filoni is painting the picture there. I don't know what, I have not read any of the expanded canon and all that stuff. The only like extra little bits of Qui-Gon I've seen are, I think, in Clone Wars and stuff like that, where you get like little glimpses of him.
Which is unfortunate, because Qui-Gon's such a, like, in the Star Wars canon, Qui-Gon is such a unique and interesting character that you just don't get from the film, because the film is not well done.
Yeah.
The Phantom Menace is a, like, when you actually break it down, it's a nightmare of a production.
It spends way too much time on trade regulations and trade disputes, and not time developing Qui-Gon Jinn as the character that Dave Filoni is trying to paint Qui-Gon Jinn as.
Well, it also doesn't help paint the character that Obi-Wan ends up becoming.
Yeah.
There's a lot of problems with the Phantom Menace. I will give you that. I still stand by the fact that Attack of the Clones is some of the worst writing that I've ever been witness to on multiple occasions, because only Star Wars could bring me back to something that terrible. Attack of the Clones is the first film I ever walked out of and thought, as a young person, this is a bad movie. But back to my point, though, is that what you are seeing from, especially, this is something about Dave Filoni that I love about him, but is definitely like going to cause the ire of people who are like, well, that's not what we're given. Because Dave Filoni is basically the closest thing we'll ever have to George Lucas.
Yeah, he's basically the like chosen successor at this point with Clone Wars and with Rebels and now with Mandalorian. Like, he is the dedicated, like, you now have the reins to continue this universe, and we get that, and I do appreciate that this series is really helping fill in because I've as somebody who hasn't like seen a ton of interviews and stuff, I know they're out there with Dave Filoni, but this is my first real exposure to hearing, you know, his story about how he got the job, and just his conversations and how he would relate to Lucas, and that he has bridged the gap now into the Disney era. Like, he is very much, I don't remember who the actual person is at Lucas that is like the official like Star Wars historian that can like weigh in on whether or not things should be canon or not. But Filoni is basically like one of those people now at Lucas Ranch. When
he got brought on to do the Clone Wars show, he was inducted into that small group of people.
Yeah, and you see hints of it in this series where like he clearly knows more about Star Wars than anybody else involved in this thing. Where you have them, there's that shot of them like investigating stormtrooper helmets or something, and Dave Filoni, it's not even a deep cut pull really. He just talks about C-3PO's head getting blown off in Empire Strikes Back, and nobody really seeing it. He makes that comparison, and Favreau just doesn't catch the reference he's making, so he calls it a deep cut. But it's like he has that and can like visualize that moment and describe it at a glance. And Favreau, who is admittedly again a fan of the movie, but not a like Dave Filoni is the fanboy that works at Lucas. Versus everybody else who has a deep love and deep affinity for Star Wars and maybe have been inspired to get into filmmaking by Star Wars, but they haven't poured through and rewatched frame over frame. They would not be doing the like movie trivia schmodown of Star Wars stuff.
It'd be unfair for Dave Filoni to get involved with that.
I mean, given how well like Sam Witwer and some of those people know Star Wars,
I almost say it's unfair for Sam Witwer to be a part of it, considering how close he is to Dave Filoni.
Agree, but yeah, I feel like the Star Wars League in Schmodown could probably still smoke Dave Filoni even, just because I don't think Dave Filoni knows like every movie word for word or something like that. So
and the level of deep cut they get for that show, I don't even get enjoyment watching it because
Exactly. I stopped watching it because I was like, I like it when I know some of the answers, guys, to this thing I love. But you go so into the weeds on it. But anyway,
you convinced me I don't know anything about this thing that I have loved my entire life.
Yeah. But go check out the movie Trivia Schmodown because they do cool stuff and it is entertaining and fun. Yeah. But yeah, that's just the comparison I would make is that like the other directors involved and the other people involved in this are are like my parents knowing about Star Wars compared to me knowing about Star Wars. And I am what they know to Star Wars compared to Dave Feloni knows to Star Wars, basically. Because he clearly is the kind of he is the chosen torchbearer in this new era, it seems.
And he wears a
not necessarily on the film front, but here in the TV sphere, the fact that he was the showrunner of or co-showrunner of Clone Wars and then Rebels and now Mandalorian, he definitely gets to. He has like the keys to the castle in where Star Wars is going in that front. And so yeah, like and a lot of those stories I really enjoy. I just also get tempered when he paints a picture like he paints Duel of the Fates in that second episode. And it's like, yeah,
but isn't it so cool that he does
that's
that?
Great. And if that was what you'd shown me and that was the movie you'd made, I would love that. If you had done that as like a retelling in Clone Wars and retconned it like a lot of Clone Wars has gotten to do, great. But like you don't get to just rewrite history and forget that you didn't actually plant any of those seeds in Phantom Menace and then like paint this very awe-inspiring picture that like the people that don't know those movies as well aren't going to come back and refute, or even maybe if they did, that's not going to get captured in this documentary necessarily.
That's fair.
Like
that's fair.
Taika Waititi could have very easily gone back and said, "Yeah, but isn't Obi-Wan really just, or isn't Qui-Gon just really obsessed with the prophecy in that film?" Like that might have been what happened after the episode cuts. But,
well, there's also a moment at the end of episode. They end these episodes very weirdly.
Mm-hmm.
Like, literally the last episode 3, ends with Carl Weathers just going, yeah. Just like that. That's how it ends. Not a definitive, like, oh, everybody's okay with it, or like, oh, we all come to a conclusion. It's just like, somebody says something and Carl Weathers goes, yeah. And that's how that episode ends. They end weirdly.
Mm-hmm.
But I will also say that you are laying a lot of things at Dave Filoni's feet that he inherited. Not that he was the cause of.
No, absolutely. No, yeah. And that's I'm not painting him as the cause, but I am saying that like he's trying to retcon stuff that like even George doesn't get to retcon. Like they have to live with those live with the decisions that had been made, and you don't get to just rewrite history. Like I mean, they could rewrite history and re-release a new version of Phantom Menace that puts all of that context in there. And there we now have Phantom Menace special editions. I would not at all be surprised by that, but the Phantom Menace that currently exists still does not tell...
Can you imagine if Dave Filoni got to put together a Phantom Menace that was actually, like, exquisite?
I think I would be very fascinated, really, to see anybody retake on the prequels, still trying to capture the same essence of that story, but with a lot of the storytelling that Clone Wars was able to expand on and tell, and just better dialogue and script writing in general. I think
just executing on things well.
I think Lucas is great, and I've had this conversation with like Logan many a time. Lucas was great with ideas and stuff, but not with dialogue and not with the specific narrative that he was trying to tell. Like he told the story, and he gets caught up in the weeds of the story he tries to tell in a way that isn't as compelling as it could be. If you had, more seasoned hand at your screenwriters.
For sure.
So.
I will say, though, that we've seen a lot of what's happened post-Disney acquisition. And I don't know. I think the Mandalorian kind of puts a new paragraph on the argument that, maybe, just maybe, I don't know, maybe Dave Filoni should have been in charge of the films.
I mean, I think having a central figurehead over the films certainly would have helped. Having a Kevin Feige type over the films would have benefited the last trilogy. I won't
not a Kevin
that.
Feige type, a Dave Filoni type.
I mean, yeah, I'm saying a Kevin Feige type in that, like, that's where we've seen it work.
Sure. Yeah, okay.
The Dave Filoni type, I don't think. I think even in as we see in this, like he. Having never done live-action stuff before this, I don't think he would have been prepared to deal with the weight of managing the new trilogy.
Yeah, that would probably crush any person.
And I mean, like I think anybody was. I think the reason, honestly, we didn't get that is because nobody wanted that job. Like JJ could have had that, but he didn't want it. He walked away from it, and then only after the Colin Trevorrow stuff happened did he come back to it. Like, he was never intended to come back and do Rise of Skywalker. So that's kind of where I think the trilogy has suffered. But I also don't think that it had to have suffered. I think you could have had without a central figurehead, you could have still had a story, a trilogy like that, told in a compelling way with different voices coming in and continuing the story and furthering the story, if they hadn't been so at odds with one another. And so, like, I think there are plenty of examples out there in I mean, largely I would pull from the television space where you have, multiple different voices coming in and telling different seasons of stories and stuff over and over again, and films as well, different iterations that tell a good, interesting, fun story, even if it's different people behind the scenes each time. Like, admittedly, not the best example, but like the first one that comes to mind is like how many people have had their hands on Fast and Furious at this point, and that's one of the biggest series in the world, and it knows what it is. I think if they hadn't gotten gun shy, Star Wars could have known what it was, and still been interesting and compelling on the film space. But yes, I do agree that if you'd had a Dave Filoni type or a Kevin Feige type that was going to say, here's the arc of 7, 8, and 9, and what we're going to do with this new cast of characters, and what we're going to do with the legacy cast of characters, I think you could have had a more cohesive trilogy, certainly, that could have still had any number of other problems. So I'm not going to, say that would have saved everything, but I do think, to your point, I think seeing how Clone Wars and Rebels and now Mandalorian all tie together, given that they have Filoni there as kind of a let's take this narrative thread and tie it into this element here. It is an interesting approach, and I'm very excited to see where they go in Mandalorian Season 2 with some of the casting announcements we've seen, of like a live-action Ahsoka and the actor who played Jango Fett coming back as a Boba Fett. I'm very curious to see where Boba Fett fits into this story, but having that actor come back, because I would not be surprised if they do that as a swerve and he's playing Rex or something like that, but because it's that actor, they can tease him as Boba Fett right now, since it would theoretically be the same face. But anyway, it'll be very interesting to see where some of those stories play out. And yeah, seeing Filoni in there, who has inherited a lot of this stuff and is getting more comfortable with it all the time. I'm excited to see where he goes, but he doesn't get to forget the past is really my major criticism there. Like, I love his story of how he got the job and his excitement there, and a lot of his talking heads in this series I love. That was really just the one that jumped out at me as like, yeah, this is great and all, but like, you're not remembering how that, or you're conveniently neglecting how that movie actually happens and how Qui-Gon Jinn was actually set up as a character in favor of how you want him set up as a character, how you would have set him up as a character if you redid it now with like all of Clone Wars behind us or something.
I don't know if that's the case so much as when you're in that deep, it's not just like the film isn't just the film anymore, it's everything beyond the scope of the film. Like, it's kind of like when you read, I guess a good comparison would be like the Silmarillion from Tolkien. Like, the Silmarillion is not a good narrative novel, because what it does is it peels away the layers of how the story is constructed partway through, because that's Tolkien's notes on how he constructs the stories is all found in the Silmarillion. And it's weird because there's sometimes narrative breaks where it starts talking about like the actual like deep mechanics that would actually probably not have made it into a narrative draft. And it's kind of like this world guide rather than a novel. It's like that, but so he's like, and the way I look at it is Dave Filoni probably sees it like that when he thinks of the film The Phantom Menace. He sees it like that versus what the film is. But you're right in that you can tell us that this is like what the scope is, but that's not what we get to see. we don't get to be Dave Feloni. Like, watching The Phantom Menace and knowing everything he knows. We watch The Phantom Menace as a film, just as a single narrative story, and that's it. I come in and I say, I know all this expanded canon stuff that ties into this, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, that doesn't change the average person's experience with The Phantom Menace.
Exactly. I think of it as when I would spend weeks playing, or in rehearsal playing a character or something, I'm building out a complete inner life and a complete backstory for this character. But at the end of the day, what the audience sees, they're not going to see. Like, they're seeing the tip of the iceberg. They're not seeing everything else under the surface, and that's what we get in Phantom Menace. Is you get the tip of an iceberg, and it's cool if you have all that other stuff going on under the surface, but you don't get to. You can't just like retell the story as if you're showing us the full iceberg when you're telling us this for the first time.
Yeah.
And then the fact that like everybody's like blown away by it at the end, the kind of the reaction to his story. I'm like, yeah, but was it that? Because no, it's not that.
And here's the thing: it is for him with what he knows, but it isn't for other people. And
it isn't for anybody else, and anybody save George.
I don't know.
And even that, like again, like he because he came to Star Wars after that movie had been out, so like he's getting all that secondhand, and he's getting all that from George telling him, here's what I was going for with Phantom Menace, and here's what I was going for Duel of the Fates. And it's like I would, if George Lucas had told me that, I would look at him if I were in Dave Filoni's shoes and be like, okay, but like you remember that none of that's in the movie, right, George? You remember you didn't drop any hints of any of that stuff in there, like so I would ask, why didn't you put any of that stuff in there? But anyway,
because he's not good at the job.
Yeah, so I don't want to spend too much more time on that particular conversation, but that is certainly the biggest reaction I have had to the series, and I had toyed around last week with the idea of writing kind of a rebuttal piece of like, hey, here's why Dave Filoni's like retelling of the Duel of the Fates doesn't hold up, with like the slightest bit of kind of analysis. But I was like, I don't care that much to fuel the like Star Wars hate machine that you can find out there. I'm sure a ton of other people made angry videos about that online, but it was something that, since we're going to talk about it here on this show, I was like, okay, I can at least express my concerns with how that was portrayed on this episode. But I do want to highlight some of the kind of the. So that is one of your favorite moments, is how it got retold?
Yeah, like I love that moment because it's like it is the deep validation of somebody who is as like a gigantic of a lore nerd and a gigantic of a, because everybody always
that definitely checks out for you.
Yeah, the way everybody dumps on Qui-Gon Jinn as a character, and they're like, oh, he's such a bad character. You know, it's like there is so much work that was done post Phantom Menace to
rehabilitate his character.
I wouldn't say rehabilitate so much as people ask, well, George, why? Like, what's the deal? Why does he do this? And it's like, well, he does it because of this or that. And it's like, cool. We didn't get any of that. We don't get any of like he has this like really amazing backstory, because we get little crumbles in the films of like he is literally the student of Count Dooku, who himself was a student of direct student of Yoda, not just a youngling that Yoda tutored, but an actual. He was like Yoda was his Jedi master. Yeah. Yep. And he's part of a chain, and he's an important part of the chain of these masters to apprentices that kind of do fulfill these almost father-like figure roles. And like with Obi-Wan, I love that he talks about Obi-Wan. Everybody's like, well, Obi-Wan took care of him. It's like, out of obligation. Like, when he talks about Obi-Wan and Anakin's relationship, it's like, yeah, it eventually did get to this point, but at the beginning, they didn't have a good relationship because Obi-Wan didn't really think that he deserved to be a Jedi Master at the time, because he let his master die. In his opinion, he couldn't have done anything about it. But the point being, though, is that like he had such inadequacies that he was feeling that he projects this uncertainty to Anakin, who is very much being brought into the Jedi Order in a very unorthodox way, and is basically was told up front, like, this wouldn't have happened if Qui-Gon wouldn't have died and made us promise to do this. So there's like a sense of obligation between these two characters about why they are together that doesn't really like it starts a very slow beginning to what ends up becoming a very dear relationship.
Yeah, I would say that, and that aspect of Filoni's kind of perspective, I have no issues with the dynamic there between Obi-Wan and Anakin, and especially because he had the opportunity to really flesh out that relationship over Clone Wars. In the films itself, you still you get a somewhat adversarial, like, brotherly relationship between the two, but it's certainly much more fleshed out in the series.
But if you look at the way that Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon act between each other, it's a very paternal child relationship, and to a point where like they're very close on that level. When you understand their backstory, you understand that there was a point in time where Obi-Wan was not going to become a Jedi. He had been trained in the temple, but he wasn't chosen by a master to become somebody's Padawan. So he was going into, well, what happens to what Jedis don't become Jedis, or when younglings don't become Padawans? They join basically different professions that are part of called the Jedi Corps, which is essentially like the Peace Corps, or he's going to go off to become a farmer somewhere, assigned to become a farmer on some planet out there, and it just so happens
that's where you get into the canon of the expanded universe versus the canon of the films. Just in the same way that people who watched Solo were that had never seen Clone Wars or something were like, wait, why the hell is Darth Maul? What? Why is that Darth Maul? How is Darth Maul alive? You have to recognize that a significant portion of your film-going audience doesn't know that stuff. A significant segment of the media-consuming audience is not consuming all of the books and all of the side other narratives that are coming out to help flesh in Qui-Gon's backstory or Obi-Wan's path to being a Padawan or something like that. So,
but that somebody wanted to put something in something as, and I use this term loosely, mainstream as the Disney calorie on the Mandalorian, and wants to brings up this very niche part of Qui-Gon's character that normally doesn't get told or explained or fleshed out on, felt very special to me as a longtime Star Wars fan and a longtime lover of Qui-Gon's story, because his story is such an integral part to what we actually the expanded universe does such a great job of making several characters' backstories and the stories that they tell in the expanded universe integral to what you end up getting to see on film, because they reverse that process. They take what's happening on screen, they're like, well, how did this, what is this situation they're drawing from, etc. It's a creative process. But I love that. The other thing I loved about this another favorite moment was when Bryce Dallas Howard basically, when I called her the Princess of Hollywood, I mean that because of this scene where she talks about her dad just taking her out of school to go on a trip to Tokyo, Japan.
Yeah.
And having a dinner with Akira Kurosawa and Toshiro Mifune. And she's listening to their conversation as she's this kid. She's full. She's lying on her dad's, her head is on her dad's lap as she's listening to this incredible, prolific Japanese actor, one of the greatest directors of all time, and then her father, who's another incredible director, basically just talk shop on movies and life, and her sharing that story. And I was just oh, that's such an amazing thing that she got to experience. That was just part of her childhood, and so she talks.
I enjoyed that story, and I enjoy in particular kind of as they're talking about. I appreciate Jon Favreau basically being like, oh, by the way, now that it's all said and done and you did great with it, we can tell you we totally gave you the hardest one because you wouldn't know better as the new director on the block. I appreciated that they kind of introduced that idea, and then they go immediately into kind of talking a lot to the cast and about how her approach was so much more focused than compared to some of the others on the emotional resonance of the characters and the scenes and all that stuff,
and the trauma when she talks about trauma. Oh man,
yeah, which absolutely it would be driven from and is what you expect and typically get from an actor turned director. Is you get the actor who's that is their bread and butter, is really investing in the emotional arc and resonance of a character or a scene, so getting that actor to kind of really drive that focus of especially a sci-fi heavy effects heavy kind of thing, where a lot of other times it is like, hey, so imagine you're getting shot and the lasers are coming here and here and here, and there's your motivation for the scene.
You're getting shot by lasers, yeah.
Yeah. I appreciated that. Like, we gave you the hard one note from Jon Favreau. That was a fun one. And just like every director's journey and their relationship with Star Wars in that first episode is certainly standout narratives. I love Rick F., whose name I'm not going to try and butcher anymore. I love him. He talks about how like he was always fascinated by the oddball characters and stuff. So the fact that he gets the episode with the Jawas was something that like he loved, and getting to see the Sandcrawler, they're massive on set, and then coming back and doing the Dirty Dozen heist episode or whatever.
Oh my gosh.
And getting to write a little bit on that one as well. He's again like surrounding himself with a cast of misfit characters that really kind of is the narrative that he wants to tell. And so some of that, and seeing how they kind of like highlight that, has me really excited for how like Peyton Reed and Robert Rodriguez, who have been like revealed as directors in this next season, kind of the stories that they're going to get to tell in there are going to be very personal types of stories for them, but in this galaxy far, far away kind of thing.
Sorry, I thought you were done talking, and I said what I said, and then it came through that you weren't done talking. My apologies. With Rick especially, like, when have we not seen a Twi'lek be like sexy or like subservient or like a lesser alien species? In this one, you get two very different kinds of Twi'leks, the brother and sister in that episode of The Mandalorian. And like the fact that he directed it, he's like, that episode is so good, and to see his kind of perspective and take on it was so cool. Anyway.
Yeah. So yeah, I love kind of all their stories, and then obviously like Taika Waititi like kind of being pitched as the ringer because he'd had Thor Ragnarok going into this, so he at least like could speak to the big budget Disney, blockbuster machine. But even there, he talked about just I love his story of coming up, and especially given that like when I go and see something like I don't remember what movie it was, but it might have even been Thor Ragnarok or something, but going and seeing something like that, and Taika Waititi like seeing his short films and stuff before the movie. It would have been Jojo Rabbit.
Yeah, we went and saw Jojo Rabbit. That weird as heck short film that he did.
Yeah,
that was hilarious.
Yeah, but it's like it's him playing all the parts or whatever, and it's just like it was I want to say 24 or 48 hour film festival kind of thing that he did, and so getting to see that as a fan of like the Alamo pre-shows, Alamo rest in peace here in Phoenix at least, sad face, getting to see like him tell that story of how he came up, basically scrounging for whatever, like dumpster diving through Weta for any kind of Lord of the Rings stuff, took me back to dumpster diving through the ASU main stage theater department stuff so that we could like reuse supplies on the student stage that I was also running at the time, where I literally would hop into our giant dumpsters and be like, hey, here's a 4x8 piece of wood that is good enough for what we need it for, that we would have otherwise thrown away, throw it on the truck. I loved kind of hearing his take on that. That was a lot of fun. And then yeah, just I enjoy the cast stories as well in that third episode, like the one you kind of already mentioned of Gina Carano, and kind of like even the notion that like it was her in like the art that Pedro Pascal was seeing when he came in and kind of had his first discussions for coming in and being the Mandalorian and stuff. Yeah, it's just a lot of cool behind the scenes stuff that I've seen. Like I've gotten tidbits here and there in seeing like release interviews, or like when they talk at Comic-Cons or something like that, they kind of tell some of these stories, but getting to see them do it in kind of that like formal roundtable setting with each other is a lot of fun, certainly. Any other favorite moments you want to highlight?
I think we covered all of my favorite moments, even if it was like a broader focus, but I think we've definitely talked enough about in depth of some of our favorite ones.
Yeah, I am, again, very, like, this is a series that I look forward to every Friday right now when the new episodes come out, because I'm just enjoying gobbling up more and more of, like, how they made this series, because it was a very good very good show, and we definitely need to do a dedicated Mandalorian season 1 episode of that D Plus show sometime in the near future.
We'll probably need a couple episodes.
I need to basically make sure that Logan just finishes it, because I want to get him on for that too, and I just don't think he has watched all of Mandalorian yet, because he's been very slow going at it. So yeah, and like I said, the Dave Feloni thing in season 2 or in episode 2 there, while one of your favorite moments, was one of my least favorite moments, just because I had that, guttural response of like, yeah, but that's not what we got. Like, I wish that's what we got, because that's a way cooler story, but that's not what we got. So yeah. So what do we think about the show overall in terms of grading it, giving it a report card, A+ to F? Where do you rank Disney Gallery The Mandalorian?
I'm gonna give it a solid B+, probably.
Mm-hmm.
Like
it's pretty much the same ballpark I'm in.
Yeah, I honestly, I'd say it averages out for me as a B. I would love to give it an A+, but like it doesn't do. It does what it does extremely well, but I just don't think it does enough for it to be like this amazing thing that everybody should watch. It does enough that if you're really interested in the concept of how they built this show, watch it. Like, highly recommended, you watch it. But it's also not like a recommendation for everybody, because I could totally see people getting bored out of their minds watching this.
Yeah, if you really liked The Mandalorian and you really enjoy like Star Wars behind the scenes stuff, I think it's a definite kind of must watch. But if you're not as into behind the scenes stuff, just go and enjoy the show itself. Because as I'm thinking about it, I'm like, the whole roundtable format that they're doing of getting all the creators together, getting a group of people together to kind of share stories about the making of the thing. Like, I remember we got a whole bunch of those kinds of roundtable stories around like Oscars time, where you get like all the best picture directors around the table talking about movie making and stuff. And I see those pass through my Twitter feed or as recommended trending videos on YouTube. I never actually watch them, and so it's the kind of thing that if this wasn't on Disney Plus, I probably wouldn't have. If these had been like straight to YouTube videos instead, I probably would have skipped over these. But the fact that it's a dedicated Disney Plus show at least has me sitting down and hopping in and watching this every week. And I think part of that is the fact that it is like, I like the topics that they're really tackling. And I'm interested in the story of The Mandalorian, of really Star Wars' first live action show. It's a fascinating one, given the history and legacy of Star Wars. So yeah, I give it probably a B myself. But yeah. Extra credit, other suggestions you might like if you like this series. Of course, The Mandalorian out there. Mm-hmm. Of course, Empire of Dreams, the other kind of like big Star Wars documentary out there on Disney Plus. And then you have basically a bunch of the films. You have Star Wars Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, The Rise of Skywalker, The Clone Wars film, Star Wars Rebels, the TV show, and then A New Hope are kind of the Disney Plus recommended things. But really, any Star Wars-y thing is a good other suggestion. Specifically, I would say the Clone Wars stuff and the Rebels, as a result of kind of its connection to the Mandalorian in the cinematic universe. Extracurriculars. What else are you watching on Disney Plus these days, Cameron? Anything?
No, like not anything. Like, I've been on the show a couple of times. People know what I'm watching.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay. Nothing different.
Yeah, I didn't know if you were watching anything like outside of the things we cover on the show. Because for example, like we'll do a dedicated episode to it at some point. But I've thrown on The Princess Bride like twice since it has come to Disney Plus at this point. Because it's just a nice, like, I can throw it on in the background while I'm doing something on my Animal Crossing island or something like that. I don't have to focus on Princess Bride because I just enjoy that movie so much and I know it so well. And it's just a nice little comfort food to put on there now that it's on Disney Plus. So.
Yeah, no, I've watched it on Disney Plus, but I've also watched it it's my favorite film of all time. Yeah. I've owned it on every single format that's ever existed. I own both a illustrated version of the book as well as both hardcover nice books. But then I have in my bag I have my really well worn, incredibly well worn copy of the book on paperback that I've read dozens of times. Mm-hmm. So. For me, and here's the thing, when I put on The Princess Bride, everything else goes away. There's no, like, I don't look at my phone. I don't, like, I'm there watching that film. That's what I do.
Okay.
Because, like, that's just how I am with The Princess Bride. The Princess Bride is, like, the broad exception to so many rules that I have about multitasking. And, like, using my time wisely by multitasking as much as possible. That, like, it's just not, like, it breaks every single rule that I have. And it's because it's my favorite thing in the world.
Yeah, all right.
I'm glad that you're enjoying it.
I had one of those kinds of viewings of it where, like, my first time I put it on there, I just kind of sat down and enjoyed Princess Bride. But then, yeah, I threw it on just as an in the background kind of thing the other day while I was playing some Animal Crossing, and I think it was while I was so I had, like, for the What's Good Games anniversary stream, I got picked and they came and visited my island on their anniversary stream, and so I basically spent a few hours, like, making specific What's Good, like, designs for shirts and stuff like that, and then I like put their logo, like, I terraformed their logo into my island as, like, a What's Good lake kind of thing, and so I think while I was doing all that kind of mindless, but I still had to focus on that more than anything else kind of thing, it was nice to have the Princess Bride going on in the background. So I think that was the connection there between those two. But yeah, so that's going to do it for this week's episode of That D Plus Show. Thank you, Cameron, again, for coming on and joining me to discuss Disney Gallery, The Mandalorian, the first few episodes. You can follow Cameron at Rev Cabot. Anything you want to shout out, Cameron?
Just overall, youtube.com/thatnerdysite. A lot of really cool stuff is going up there now, as well as just over on thatnerdysite.com. My review for Wintermore Tactics Club is up there. That's the latest project I've done. Also, you know what I should probably start throwing out there? Twitch.tv/RevCabot. I am actually streaming there now, so that's something I should put that out more. There we go.
Go give that a follow. You can follow me at Trevor J. Starkey. I will. The plug I will make is go support our newest podcast. I always forget the name of it because I wanted to call it That Nerdy News You Care About, and it's kind of in there because the sunglasses that have nerdy across them are, like, in the logo where it would be that, but it is just That News You Care About is our video game news show that Logan Wilkinson is hosting on a weekly basis, new episodes every Wednesday. I'm kind of on there as a co-host tentatively, but there might be times where I have to step away and he'll bring on a guest or he'll bring on somebody else from the site, like Cameron or something like that. So yeah, check out that new podcast. In the first episode that's out currently, we talked about kind of the saga around Naughty Dog for the last couple months with their crunch and culture history, as well as all the leaks and all that kind of activity surrounding the impending launch of Last of Us Part 2. And then we also talked about kind of what this year will mean for the future of E3. So good conversations over there. Check that out. That News You Care About. It's now on Spotify and iTunes and all that fun stuff. So check out that show. You follow all of the latest from our site at thatnerdysite.com or on Twitter at thatnerdysite. And if you'd like to be on this show, you can go to thatnerdysite.com/D+guest and let us know what Disney Plus offering you would like to chat about. There's a little Google form there you have to fill out. If you liked what you heard, please like, rate, review, subscribe, share with your friends, all that fun stuff. And if you do feel so inclined, you can always support us on Patreon at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. Thank you again for joining us. As always, stay nerdy and be good to each other. Class dismissed.